are going to be just talking about a lot of different things. Because, oh my gosh, there's a lot happening. There's a lot happening in general that I just want to just, like, talk about. Whether it's good, bad, well, not necessarily bad, but, you know, I was debating about what to stream, and then I was like, I don't really want to stream anything, and I just have a lot on my mind that I just want to talk about, and, you know, if people are here, we can chat amongst ourselves, or I'll just talk like I normally do, which is to nobody. But you guys will listen anyways. Maybe. But there's just kind of a lot to talk about. And, you know, I think sometimes I don't want to play anything. For me, with my ADHD, it can kind of be a little bit hard to predict when I want to do something. I don't know if you guys know, but, like, having ADHD sometimes it gives you this kind of thing called, like, ADHD paralysis, or, like, where you're not, like, paralyzed, but it does kind of, like, hinder you from, like, doing certain things because, you're kind of, like, stuck. You know how people are, like, you know, .exe stopped working? That's kind of what ADHD brains do, where at some point we're just kind of like stuck and we can't like move forward with anything. This is why this is why a lot of us are like impulsive. We say things that we don't really mean, we do things that we don't really mean, because like we have this like urge to do it, and like it's just there and we're still thinking about it. And so sometimes it's like, if I try to force myself to do something that I subconsciously don't want to do, it's not going to end well. I'm not going to end up doing it. It's very difficult to overcome. And it's something that like, I don't really think ADHD meds really do anything. I don't really take medication at this point. Maybe I should, but honestly, I don't really want to take medication. I mean, I feel like it's not a big enough issue for me to want to, like, self-regulate, or not self-regulate, but regulate, you know? Like, there are symptoms that you can, like, treat with ADHD, and there's symptoms that are just kind of, like, it just comes with it. Because the thing is, with this, it's hard to know, like, when I need it. It's not something where it's like ADHD, like the attention medication, where it's like, yeah, I need to pay attention for school, so I'm going to take it before I go to school. These are things that just happen just like on a regular basis that don't really have a time period. So and that's why I feel like medication wouldn't really work. I don't know, maybe that's something to talk about with my doctor. But in terms of, that's kind of why, if you ever wondered like why I like make certain decisions, and then sometimes I don't necessarily go through with them, is because I usually end up with this kind of like mental state where I don't really want to do it. It's kind of hard, like, because sometimes when I make plans, what happens is that I make the plan and then I can't stop thinking about it. Right? So usually I'm early because if I try to plan things in advance, my brain will only think about that one thing for 24/7 until I actually do it. Which makes it very difficult to plan things in advance, because if I have something very exciting that is like coming, like all I'm doing is thinking about that one thing until the date. So let's say something is coming out in like a couple of days. I am just thinking about that one thing 24/7 until it comes out. So it makes it very difficult, because like sometimes like I have like set plans to do something, like for stream and for videos, like, oh, I want to do something for Christmas, or oh, I want to do something for Valentine's Day. But if I make that announcement, I have the urge to do it before when I just announced it, which makes it very difficult. Anyways, not important. Basically, I'm just telling you how my mind kind of works. It's very I think the problem is that some people don't have ADHD. Well, a lot of people don't have ADHD. And so people without ADHD don't really know what it's like to live with ADHD. The only people who know what it's like to live with ADHD is people who have it. Because otherwise, people are like, what do you mean? What do you mean you have to do this? What do you mean you can't just turn it off? Like, no, I can't just turn it off. It's a disability for a reason. And yes, it is a disability. Sometimes it has its perks, but it is very much a disability. I think I've had growing up, I had a hard time kind of acknowledging that ADHD. Well, I was like growing up, like a few years ago. It was very difficult to admit that ADHD is a disability, because in some sense, people see it as kind of like a superpower in a way. Because there are some things that ADHD does well. Like it doesn't necessarily always hinder you. The problem is that when it does hinder you, it gets very intrusive. And it's very difficult to kind of overcome. Because it is a mental disorder. And it's something that is kind of like casually accepted. Where like ADHD is not one of those disorders where everyone is like hating about it. I mean, they used to. But ADHD is a little bit more kind of, not accepted, but it's more common nowadays. Because people, well, one, because people get misdiagnosed. And the other is because people have an idea of what ADHD is, and they're wrong. Well, they're not necessarily wrong, but it's not like the only thing that it is. See, when you hear about ADHD, you think attention problems, you think impulsivity, you think hyperactivity, that kind of thing, right? ADHD is actually kind of interesting because it's a lot more than that. I mean, yes, it's called attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So it is kind of like, the name is what it is. But it's kind of a lot more. And when I actually looked at the DSM-5, things started to actually kind of make sense. As like suddenly I'm like, wait, I'm not the only one who does this? I'm not the only one? It's kind of like when you know what you have, but you don't know what you have at the same time. Like, I knew I had ADHD since, like, 2014. But I didn't really know what it meant until much, much later. In fact, there are some things that I didn't know came with ADHD that I'm now learning is an ADHD thing. I'm like, what? You mean to tell me I'm not the only person who has experienced this? And part of the reason why I'm talking about ADHD paralysis is because that's one of those things where I didn't know. I didn't really know that was an ADHD problem. I thought that was just a me problem. But honestly, I probably should have put two and two together. But hello, Wacky, how you doing? It's interesting because it's like ADHD is a very common disorder, right? A lot of people know about it, but they don't necessarily know about it. So let's look at the actually, where is it? Is it Mayo Clinic? I don't know if Mayo Clinic is a good idea to look at. There's like something that had like the list of like, stuff that comes with it. The stuff that comes with ADHD. Where was that list? I know this is not one of the topics that we were looking to talk about, but if I don't talk about it, it's just going to be in my head all... Oh, here it is. This is it? Okay. I think this is it. Okay. Here's the DSM-5, or here's what it says. Right? This is like the NHS, that stuff. This is very reliable. So there's two types. There's inattentiveness and there's hyperactivity and I have inattention. Well, actually, I I have inattentiveness and also kind of impulsivity. I don't have hyperactivity, but I do have impulsivity. Basically, I have ADHD inactive type. I think that's what it's called. Whereas there's kind of like a mix. Okay, so like the main signs of inattentiveness, having a short attention span and being easily distracted. Check. Yep, definitely. Making careless mistakes. Yeah. Definitely. Appearing forgetful or losing things. Yes. Being unable to stick to tasks that are tedious or time consuming. Absolutely. Appearing to be unable to listen or carry out instructions. Okay, the reason why they said appearing is because for us with ADHD, it is kind of appearing that way. Because for me, I'm like, I hear you, I'm listening, but 5 minutes later, I don't know what you just said. That's kind of the problem. It's like, for me, I actually have really good memory. I have really good memory. And I do try to listen. But sometimes my brain is like, you know what? We're actually not going to listen to this. And we're just going to forget about it in like 2 minutes. And so I'll be like, okay, what did you just say? And it's not because I'm trying to be rude or trying to like, it's not like I'm trying to not listen. It's just that sometimes it just happens. Sometimes it just happens. And that's the thing. Sometimes you don't know when it's happening because you'll be listening, right? You'll be listening and you're like, okay, cool. And then 5 minutes later, you're like, what was I supposed to do again? And it's like, oh my gosh. I wasn't trying to do it. It's like, oh. Anyways, constantly changing activity or tasks, yes. Having difficulty organizing tasks. And then hyperactivity and impulsiveness is the main. Okay, so the main signs are being unable to sit still, especially in calm or quiet surroundings. Yes, constantly fidgeting. I think it's actually, you know what happens? It's like it's kind of actually similar to Tourette's in a way, where I've heard the more you get nervous, like the more nervous you get, the more you tick, right, with Tourette's. It's kind of similar to that with ADHD. I've noticed that the more nervous that I get, the more I'm likely to fidget. It's like the more like uncomfortable I get, the more fidgety I get. It's like I don't really notice it on a casual level, like if I'm just relaxing and everything. But like if I'm like stressed, like one thing that people find annoying, but I do, is that if I'm like writing, right, with a pen, like this, it's very easy to start like, you know, doing the thing that people get annoyed at, and it's not necessarily intentional. Sometimes it's like I like the sound of the pen. It's like I like the feeling and the sound of it, and so I'm just gonna use this pen to entertain myself in a way. This also happens with like rolling chairs, where you're like, you know, you're spinning around and around and yeah. And the thing is, it is like annoying when other people do it, but it's not annoying when we do it, because for us it's like, yeah, I get annoyed when other people do annoying things, but it's like I can't be the problem. What did I just do? Okay. So, also, being unable to concentrate or on tasks. Yeah. Well, there's like two sides of ADHD. One side is that you can't focus at all. The other side is that you're so focused that you lose you lose everything else that is happening. That sometimes happens. it might have been the medication, but sometimes you're I'm like so focused on this one thing because I'm trying not to get distracted, right? I'm effortlessly trying not to get distracted. I need to focus on this one thing, and I'm just focused, zeroed in on it. That everything else becomes like white noise, I guess. The other thing, okay, so excessive physical movement. Yeah, you might notice that I move. I guess I move my hands a lot. And yeah, that's part of the ADHD. Being unable to wait their turn. Yeah. Well, okay, I'm very patient, but it does get like, it's kind of like, it's like the closer you get to something happening, the more you think about it. The more anxious you get, the more you kind of anticipate it. Like, I think people with ADHD and like me, we kind of anticipate when something is going to happen or when something is supposed to happen. And when the closer we get, it's kind of like the more impatient that we get. Not necessarily impatient, like we don't want to be rude. Like I don't want to be rude. I always like to like wait my turn and everything. But it gets very difficult the closer you get to when it's supposed to happen. It's like waiting in the doctor's office, like staring into space. It's like, I do think that in that case, like the phone helps. Because the phone, we get distracted by the phone and we get trapped there for like 5 hours. So it's a very easy way to distract ourselves. And I think that's why a lot of us end up kind of addicted to our phones in a way. Because for us, our phones is a way of coping and kind of mediating in a way. But then the problem is that with phones is that it's very hard to put down once you picked it up. So it's kind of, I guess in a way, you end up with a different problem. Acting without thinking, absolutely. Interrupting conversations, yes, I don't mean to interrupt you, but the thing is with interrupting conversations, the way that it works is simple. When someone is talking, right, someone's making their point, I'm currently thinking of what I'm going to say in response. And it's kind of like the kind of anticipating the wait is where it's like when you get to the point of like, I need to say this, I need to talk, it's kind of like you get in the head of like, okay, well, I need to respond to this one point, and it kind of becomes difficult to kind of like you feel a need to insert yourself. It's like one thing that I had a problem with growing up is that oftentimes I was the person who got talked over with from, like, people would just talk over me. People would just kind of like talk and talk and talk, and then I wouldn't get the chance to say what I'm thinking. Now, someone with ADHD, of course, that's going to be an issue because at some point, you kind of get to the point where you just have to say everything. And it doesn't matter if it happened 5 minutes ago. I need to get my point out so that I can stop thinking about it. It's like I don't think people understand. When you have a point you want to make with ADHD, you are thinking about it 24/7. And if you never get the opportunity to say it, you are going to be thinking about it for weeks. You cannot just make it go away. You cannot just forget about it. You're going to be thinking about it for weeks on end. Probably even years. Because, like, for us, I think expressing ourselves is very important because it's a way of kind of dealing with our disorder. Right? ADHD is kind of like you're thinking about a lot of things 24/7 and you don't have any breaks and you can't just stop thinking about it. That's not how that works. So some people are like, well, how are you talking about something that happened like 5 years ago? It's probably because I never had the chance to actually say what I wanted to say. And so now I'm saying it. Whether it has other consequences later, that's future me's problem. But I'm just gonna say it because I can't not talk about it. It's like us with ADHD. It is kind of harder to keep a secret. Although I am very good at keeping secrets. It's like at some point this has to come out because all I'm gonna do is think about it, and and I don't want to keep thinking about it. So it's like the solution to not thinking about it is just to say it. It's like I am going to have this stuck in my head until I do say it. It is interesting because here's the symptoms in adults. Let's see. In adults, the symptoms of ADHD are more difficult to define. This is largely due to a lack of research into adults with ADHD. As ADHD is a developmental disorder, it's believed it cannot develop in adults without it first appearing during childhood. But symptoms of ADHD in children and teenagers often continue into adulthood. So here's the conundrum, right? Here's the conundrum about ADHD. I don't know why this ended up I don't know how. It's fine. We're talking about ADHD. We're just going to talk about it. Here's the conundrum. Usually, okay, from my experience growing up, I definitely remember parts of having symptoms of ADHD when I was younger. But the problem is that I could not recognize what those symptoms were. And the other thing is that oftentimes kids have the same symptoms as people with ADHD. That's the problem, right? Because yes, a child can have hyperactivity. A child can forget things a lot. A child can be impulsive. A child can have the urge to interrupt. Right? They can have the same things that people with ADHD have. The problem with ADHD is kind of like everyone can have symptoms of OCD. Everyone can. The problem is when it becomes unusual, I guess. Not unusual. What's the word? What am I thinking of? What am I trying to say? The problem is when it becomes, like, irrational, I guess. Not irrational. I guess irrational. It's like, it's like you come to an age where it starts to peak out more. Like, the reason why I got diagnosed in 2014 is because that was the year that things started to get harder in school, right? For me, elementary school and middle school were pretty easy. I could get by without medication, and there wasn't a single circumstance where I thought, oh, I'm different from somebody else. It's like because when you're in elementary school and middle school, you're all gonna kind of act similarly, whether or not you have a disorder or not. It's like kids will act the same way regardless of whether or not they have ADHD. 2014 was when I entered into high school. Freshman year of high school. And this is where you start to notice differences. Because when you're a teenager, you usually like develop out of the ADHD phase. Like the kids will start being more focused and take things more seriously and get into other things. And also you have to realize that the curriculum is also going to get difficult, right? Middle school is kind of a joke. Middle school says they're going to prepare you for high school, and then they don't. middle school says they're gonna be like high school, and then high school is completely different. High school is like, there's a lot of different there's a lot of different factors coming into play. High school, you have, puberty, you have, like, your hormones are changing, you also probably have ADHD, which is gonna only increase, and the symptoms are gonna get harder to manage. And also, you're gonna need to start figuring out which medication you need in order to cope with these symptoms. And the other problem is, sometimes teachers don't accommodate you in the way that they should. There's also kind of the problem of people thinking that ADHD is fake. There's actually people who think that ADHD is a fake disorder. No, it is not fake. What happened is that there used to be a distinction between attention deficit disorder and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. The way that my doctor described it at the time was that if you have like an increase of hyperactivity, right? Those are the people that usually have Adderall. Take Adderall. Like usually Adderall is for people with like high intensive ADHD. Attention deficit disorder is when you don't have the hyperactivity. The hyperactivity part isn't really there, or at least it isn't really prominent. It's more like the other issues that are your problem. But recently, they changed it to ADHD. ADHD is the overall umbrella category. But there's different types of ADHD. And so people think that attention deficit disorder is fake. No, it was just mislabeled. Attention deficit disorder is very much real. But it was just kind of like miscategorized or mislabeled, because when you look at the symptoms a little bit closer, you realize that a lot of them are very similar. Yeah, exactly. It's not fake. I grew up with people who claim to have doctors sometimes would say that like ADHD was fake, or like I was faking it, or that, well, not all of them doctors, okay? Not all of these are doctors. Some of them, I don't really know. Okay, basically, let's restart. So growing up, there's a lot of like people who don't really understand ADHD. And so they think it's fake. They don't really understand how someone can think that way, and so they think it's fake. The problem is actually that a lot of people get misdiagnosed. There's a lot of people that get misdiagnosed because there's a lot of disorders that are very similar to each other. Tourette's, very similar to ADHD in textbook. On the textbook, Tourette's and ADHD are very similar to each other, so they often get misdiagnosed. Autism also is another one that often gets misdiagnosed with ADHD and Tourette's, because our symptoms are very similar. So sometimes people will show symptoms that are indicative of ADHD. But their problem is not ADHD, their problem is Tourette's, or their problem is autism. And so they would get misdiagnosed, and so they would act differently than people with ADHD would, because we are different. We are different, so we don't act the same way. And so basically, this whole thing comes down to a misunderstanding of what mental disorders actually are. Kind of because for a while, at least for me growing up, right, ADHD was this thing where it's like no big deal. People didn't really consider it a disorder. People didn't even really consider it like a problem. People thought like it was like just a different lifestyle, different way of thinking. But it actually is a problem. It actually is a problem, because there's multiple times in my life where I can distinctly say that yes, ADHD affected this moment. ADHD got in the way of this happening, because even though I thought it was normal, it wasn't. It wasn't normal. Also, because the accommodations that the schools give are absolutely trash. They don't help. Because I don't know, like for me growing up, like my accommodations were like extended time, or well, actually mostly just extended time. It wasn't really, usually I think nowadays they give like the independent studying thing where like if you take a test you go into a different room. For a while that was not the case. For the while we were in the same room as everybody else, and the problem is that kids are annoying and they do things that are very distracting. And it takes longer for me to realize something than somebody else. Right? For me, I had an issue in college. So in 2018, I had an issue. Well, no. Well, was it 2000? It was like 2019, I guess. It was like the second semester when I was retaking pre-calc. Because I had to retake it. Spring semester. I had an issue with a professor that did not accommodate me. He's like one of those professors that was very into like the way that he taught. Like he had a specific way of teaching, and he believed in like no graphing calculators, no timed assignments where you don't really get an extension. You took the test on paper, and it's like the problem with me for that is that I had situations where I eventually realized how to solve something. I eventually realized, I remembered, oh, this is what you do. But I wasn't able to do it on the test because the time was up. So by the time that I realized, oh, this is what I have to do, I couldn't even do it. It's like, because the thing about tests is they're not supposed to be a test of what I know at that moment. Like, right? Like, tests are an issue because, well, honestly, tests are an issue because they're standardized. Standardized testing is bullshit. Because we are not standard. It's like, testing for me is supposed to be a test of your abilities and, like, your ability to retain information, right? Your ability to retain information. But ADHD is a disorder that gets in the way of retaining such information. To where it's like, it'll take you like 2 seconds more to realize something than it would a normal person, right? A lot of the times teachers use the excuse of, oh, you just didn't study. Oh, you're just being if you don't, raise your hand if you heard this. If you don't remember the material right away, you won't remember it in 5 minutes. Actually, yes, I will remember it in 5 minutes because sometimes that's just how memory works, okay? Sometimes you will study so much that you won't remember like what you're supposed to remember, but something will eventually trigger. Sometimes something will eventually trigger. Not all the time. Sometimes it just generally didn't study enough. But sometimes you would legitimately not remember, and then 5 minutes later you'll be like, I got it. It's this. Yeah. So there are a bunch of disorders. That get confused with each other. Because if you look at the DSM-5, and it even says it here, if you look at the DSM-5, a lot of them are very similar. a lot of them have very similar issues with each other. And sometimes those disorders don't really bring attention to itself until a little bit later. And sometimes that little bit later is like the difference between what your experience was like in school. Like for me, I was diagnosed with ADHD in 2014, but I did not fully understand what that meant until at least 2018, and even then I still didn't fully understand what it meant until now. There are things that I just didn't understand was a part of ADHD, and maybe the doctor did explain it. I'm sure the doctor explained it, but I have ADHD. So the problem is that I probably didn't remember, or I probably was like trying to, like, you know, because sometimes our own disorders are the problem, because sometimes, yes, someone did probably explain it to me, like in 2014. Someone probably explained, like my doctor probably did a very good job at explaining what ADHD was. But I didn't process that information. It is funny though, because like now I'm like, okay, now I know what the problem is, but I don't know if I want to like treat it. Like for me, it's like, yes, I understand that this is a huge issue, but is it intrusive enough? Is it intrusive in my life enough to warrant needing like medication for it? And I think that's kind of the question, like, because for me, it's very hard to determine when it's ADHD and when it's me. Because sometimes I'm like, okay, well, I don't, the attention part, that's easy to kind of adjust for, right? Because it's like, you need to pay attention when you're driving, or you need to pay attention when you're at school. But if you're not doing that on a regular basis, it kind of brings the question of whether or not you need it, like, constantly. And the thing is, sometimes you don't realize you need medication until the present time when you need medication. It's like, sometimes I'm like, today is fine. Today, I don't really have that many symptoms. And then tomorrow is like, oh, there it is. I guess it's kind of realizing, like an alcoholic realizing when they're drunk. It's like they don't realize it until it's too late. It's like ADHD people probably don't even realize that it's ADHD until it's too late. I just think that ADHD really needs to be talked about more, because it's talked about on a loose definition, but on an actual definition, it's not really talked about that much. And it is a genuine problem. It is a genuine problem that causes a lot of issues. And I like how, let's talk about the DC. No. I think, the reason why I'm, like, so fixated on this now is the fact that so many people are actually starting to talk about it. And not in the way that you think, but in kind of like some people talk about it as a relatable thing. Like, this is something relatable. But sometimes you realize, wait, is it relatable, or is it just that we all have the same disorder? Because a lot of people on the internet, especially the people that I watch, I realized that a lot of us have the same disorder. It's like, wait, you have ADHD too? Oh. Is that why? And the thing is, sometimes it's hard to distinguish when it's like an individual person, and when it's all of us experiencing this. All of us have experienced this. Because I truly think that if you don't have ADHD, you have probably no clue what we're talking about. What it's like to have ADHD. You have an imagination of what it is like, but it's not it. I think the people that can relate to ADHD people the most, that don't have ADHD, Definitely people with Tourette's. Definitely people with autism. Well, probably on a certain spectrum. I don't know. Because, I mean, we don't have necessarily... Well, I guess we do kind of have a social problem. I guess it depends. I think it depends. It's just that our symptoms are very similar. That's why. So, I think in a way, it kind of... I mean, I'm not a doctor, right? So, don't use me as a source. But... I might need to get retested. Not because I don't think I have ADHD. I definitely have ADHD. But, like, when I got it in 2004... The thing that I did in 2014 was not only a long time ago, but also, it wasn't very formal. And maybe it's because my doctor kind of understood the way that I was behaving before. And so it was like, they didn't even need to really do the test. Right? Because, like, sometimes, like, your doctor kind of already knows, or at least has a theory of, like, what's going on. So when you bring it up, it's like, oh yeah, this is the problem. And you're like, oh, okay. But I don't think, like, I know I have it, right? That's not like, that's not the problem. I think I'm pretty sure I know what I have. But at the same time, it wouldn't hurt to retest, just to confirm it even more, or even kind of talk about, like, is there a way to battle these symptoms? Because maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm thinking, okay, I don't need medication anymore because I don't really need to pay attention anymore. Not exactly like that. It's like for me, I think that they probably only have medication for attention problems, right? Because that's the easiest thing to solve. But I probably am wrong. There are probably medication where it does indeed actually help with, like, the interrupting thing and, like, the forgetfulness and that kind of thing. But maybe not. I mean, I think the problem is that sometimes combination of medications can do different things, right? Definitely something to think about. Definitely something to talk about probably later. Maybe I'll bring it up. If I remember, I'll bring it up in my next physical, which I don't even think is anytime soon. So, I don't know. It's not an immediate issue, to be honest. But it's interesting because when I was talking to a therapist, I haven't had therapy before, I did talk to her about, like, you know, do I have, like, this other thing? Because at the time I was thinking that at the time when I was talking to her, I thought that maybe I had, like, some sort of, like, bipolar depression or something like that. Because, like, I would be, like, happy, like, I would be completely normal most of the time. But certain situations would then kind of bring out depressive episodes. Because she kind of explained to me that it might not be kind of like what I think it is. Because it's like all of these things are very similar to each other. And because I have ADHD, it's hard to determine whether or not it's like a new thing or if it's just ADHD doing its thing. It's like, I think that's also why it's kind of hard once you get a diagnosis. It's very hard to get re-diagnosed with something else. Because your doctor will look at symptoms, right? And then they'll say, oh, this is because you have ADHD. Because it says in your medical record that you have ADHD. Oh, yeah, that's because of that. But sometimes that issue is actually something more than what they think it is. That's why sometimes it's good to not necessarily disclose whether or not you have, like, a specific disorder. Because sometimes, especially if you're going into a new doctor, right, you might want to, it is kind of a good idea to get their opinion on what you have. Because you can, like, describe the ADHD symptoms, but then maybe there's something else that, like, wasn't caught before from your previous doctor, and now they're like, wait a second. Hold on. It's like, because I feel like there is, in a way, confirmation bias, right? Whereas, like, if a doctor believes, right, that you have X, they're not going to believe that you have Y, because they're way too similar to each other, and it's hard to distinguish when it's one or the other. A lot of the times people are like, oh, you're faking it because you're not like me, or you're like, your symptoms are inaccurate, or something like that. Well, oftentimes, it probably isn't inaccurate. They're not faking it. They have something wrong with them. It's just that they were told the wrong thing. It's like, you know, some people do fake it, right? Some people exaggerate the symptoms for the internet and for social media. But some people are genuinely not faking it. They just think that they have something that they don't have, which is very common. I know Sweet Anita likes to talk about it, because she has Tourette's. And she talks about how she didn't get diagnosed for Tourette's until she was like 24? Something like that. Because all of her doctors thought it was just ADHD. And that's something that's very common. Because also there are certain disorders that don't get diagnosed as frequently, because parents are kind of afraid of when they get diagnosed for that. That was a very common thing. Like dyslexia, there's a lot of families that will refuse to get diagnosed for certain disorders because it has certain connotations, and they don't really want to know the answer. So that's why a lot of the times, later in life, people get diagnosed. And they discover, hey, this was the problem all along. It's very interesting. Anyways, there's some stuff, I think, about the DCU. This is what I was actually wanting to talk about. Not that. Okay, no. Gonna segue into the next topic. It is very interesting, though. ADHD is something that I really need to talk about more, because not a lot of people not a lot of people in my section of the internet is talking about it a lot. Some people are. I'm pretty sure it's kind of like one of those things where it's like, for example, something that I want to do personally is I at some point want to do a DNA test, like not Ancestor, well, something like Ancestor, but a little bit more accurate. But it's like one of those things where it's probably going to say that I'm 100% Korean, because I probably am 100% Korean. But at the same time, it's because I'm adopted. I don't know everything. And so, like, I want something that's, like, very specific. And also, like, not as biased. The thing about the problem with, like, the, like, ancestry and stuff like that is that for Asians, at least, they often are inaccurate because they often they don't have as big of a DNA pool. So it's like, and basically with DNA tests, they kind of just like compare you to everybody else, and so that's how they're able to be like, you might be this or you might be that. But